Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's another Race to 8 series. Today I'm going to teach you the ways of the Witherbloom, where we're going to drain everybody's life and game their lives instead for our own use. And if you're new to this series, the Race to 8 series is where we take a deck and we build it on the lowest budget possible to compete against power level 8 decks and $500 decks. Mostly the decks that I play against. And for this series, we're going to go over the Witherbloom Witchcraft deck, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But before I get into the video, I'm the Patchwork Commander. I make weekly videos every single Friday. So if you like the content, please like and subscribe. And quickly, I have a TCG Player affiliate link. So if you look in the description down below, it'll be right there. And it really helps out the channel a ton. So if you could go check that out, great, thanks. And before getting into all the nitty gritty and the great cards for this deck, I need to go over the commander that I chose, and that's Dina Soul Steeper. Now, I like this commander for two reasons. First of all, a 2-mana commander is impossible to beat. Just being able to get a commander down on turn 2 will get you so much value over the course of a game. But the fact that she makes every opponent lose 1 life every time you gain a single life is so crazy valuable. And I took advantage of this in 4 ways, and that's using life gain synergies, and then we use card draw engines that are better in the deck, and also better ramp packages, then payoffs, and lastly, some better removal for this deck. So let's get right into this video. When going over the life gain synergies, we have to go over the singular best card for this deck, and that's Essence Warden. And it's great because it only costs us 1 mana. It says whenever another creature enters the battlefield, we gain 1 life. And the reason this card is great, we can play this on turn 1, and all of a sudden on turn 2 we play our commander and we've already gotten a trigger, and we've already made all of our opponents lose a life. Now, basically, this is going to lose our opponents a life every single time a creature enters the battlefield, so it's by far the best card in this deck. Getting on to the next card, and that's Kazandu Nectar Pot. Costing only 2 mana, this has a landfall ability. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, we gain 1 life. Again, with our commander, this just means a bunch of damage to our opponents. And along the same lines, but I like this card just a little bit better, is Retreat to Hagra. Costing only 3 mana, but instead, whenever a land enters the battlefield, we can choose one of the 2 abilities. We're going to choose a landfall ability to make each of our opponents lose 1 life and we gain 1 life. I like this just for the simple fact of, even if we don't have our commander on the battlefield, we are going to make our opponents lose a bunch of life as well. And the next card that's great for this deck is Tablet of Guilds, costing 2 mana, and we can choose 2 colors. And if we cast a spell and it has either of the colors that we chose, we get to gain as much life as the colors that we chose. For example, if we play our commander with this on, all of a sudden we gain 2 life. If we play just a black spell, then we just gain 1 life. But basically, this is only here. Whenever we cast a spell, we're going to gain life. Again, with our commander, we are going to drain everybody. Great card. On to the next is Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Now, this card is so great because even if our commander's not on the battlefield, this will make our opponents lose a bunch of life when it enters the battlefield, and we're going to gain so much life at once. I just like this as a big effect that can also win the game, but it also has a good amount of synergy with our commander. And as far as other life gain synergies, we have Wolverine Riders. Now, I just thought this was a cool and unique effect, and I always love getting a bunch of bodies on the battlefield, and that says at the beginning of each upkeep, we're just going to make an elf, and every single time an elf enters the battlefield, we get to gain life equal to its toughness. Now, this just means we're going to gain a life at the beginning of each player's upkeep, so this is going to deal a bunch of damage with our commander on the battlefield. And the card that I think is going to deal the most damage as far as our life gain synergies goes is Pontiff of Blight. Having the Extort ability and giving all of our creatures the Extort ability, which basically means every single time we cast a spell, for each creature, we can pay 1 black mana and deal each opponent 1 damage, and we're going to gain 3 life because we're going to have 3 opponents on the battlefield. Just in the later game, being able to pump a bunch of mana, if you draw Essence Warden later in the game, all of a sudden you can pump mana equal to the number of creatures you control and just deal 1 damage to each of your opponent. As far as our ramp and card draw package, it all starts off with our most explosive mana dork, and that's Accomplished Alchemist. Either adding us 1 mana of any color, or adding X of 1 mana, where X is the amount of life we've gained this turn. Meaning that we can just gain a bunch of life. For example, we play that Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and now all of a sudden we've gained, I don't know, let's say 12 life, and we can spend 12 mana this turn. This card is great for this kind of deck, and another card that I just like adding to any green deck is Wild Growth. Being able to, for 1 mana, just enchant a land, and then being able to tap for an additional mana on that land is great, because a lot of the times lands are just going to stick on the battlefield forever. And another card that's going to gain us a bunch of life, or just draw cards, which is great for our deck, is Cosmos Elixir. At the beginning of our end step, we can either draw a card if we have more than our starting life total, or we're just going to gain 2 life. Now with our commander, we don't mind either side of this card. Just being able to gain 2 life and drain our opponents and drawing us a card is just great for our deck. And the next card, as far as card advantage goes, is Beast Whisper, costing 2 and 2 green. Just being able to draw a card every single time we cast a creature. This is going to be the gas that keeps our engine going, because we have plenty of creatures to trigger this ability. So the next card that can either gain us life or draw us card is Dread Presence. I like this card because it double dips, costing 4 mana, 3 and a black, is going to, whenever we play a swamp, we can either lose 1 life and draw a card, or we can do damage to any target, 2 damage, and then gain 2 life. Now I like this if there are just some small creatures on the battlefield, or we can play multiple lands in a turn. All of a sudden, we can deal damage to any pesky little thing that's on the battlefield, and just being another way to draw cards is a great effect. Now the last card, give me a break on this card because it is really hard to pronounce, is Necrogia, costing 5 mana. It's an instant. We can only play this at the beginning of our end step. We're going to lose X life and draw X cards. Now basically this is a one-time Necropotence, and the reason I like this card is when we're gaining a bunch of life, we're going to have a bunch of life to spare, meaning we can use that to draw a bunch of cards in one turn, just the turn before we're about to go off. As far as payoffs goes, Marauding Blight Priest is a great place to start. Being another copy of our commander for 3 mana, just with Essence Warden, for example, now every single time a creature enters the battlefield, that means we're going to deal 2 damage to each of our opponent, and we're going to gain 1 life. And another card that's the most expensive card that I could fit in this deck is Witch of the Moors. And this costs 5 mana, it has Death Touch, and at the beginning of our end step, if we've gained life, each of our opponents are going to sacrifice a single creature, and then we can return a creature from our graveyard back to our hand. Now this card is just so much value. Again, even if we've only gained 1 life that turn, all of a sudden our opponents have to sacrifice a creature, and we get to return creatures from our graveyard. Talking about returning creatures from the graveyard, Command of the Dreadhorde is one of my favorite cards, and it's only 92 cents. This card is great. Being able to pay X life and choose X target creatures or planeswalkers in anybody's graveyard, and we can pay that much life equal to the total mana cost, and then we're going to put all those creatures and planeswalkers onto the battlefield. Now this is a great way to take advantage of having a bunch of life. Now let's just say we're at 50 life, and all of a sudden we can turn this into a Rise of the Dark Realms, because we don't care if we lose a bunch of life to put every single creature back onto the battlefield. And as far as the main Strixhaven set, we've got a card that's amazing payoff for this deck, and that's Valentine Dean of Vane and Lisette Dean of Root. Now the front side of this card is amazing because it's just going to exile our opponent's stuff, and we can pay 2 to make a pest, which when it dies we also gain a life, which is good synergy with our deck. Also, it has Menace and Lifelink, so it's going to be great partner pairing with our commander because it's just going to get in early and we're going to gain life off of the Lifelink. But not only that, I really like this for the backside, meaning that whenever we gain life, we can pay 1 mana and give each of our creatures a +1/+1 counter and trample as well. So that is great because we're going to have a bunch of small creatures and all of a sudden gaining 1 life, and all of a sudden our creatures become huge. And the last card that's just a little bit more spendy is Vito, Thorn of Duskrows, costing 3 mana, and whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Now, again, back to the card that I really think is great for this deck is, again, we have Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Now, this card just is going to gain us a ton of life at once, and all of a sudden, not only is it dealing that much damage to each opponent, now we get extra damage with Veto as well. But this card is great because it also gives all of our creatures lifelink. So if we don't have a great way to gain life, all of a sudden all of our creatures are gaining lifelink, and with our commander out, again, we are going to deal so much damage with this lifelink. When initially looking over the removal package, I had a little bit of a problem with the fact that a lot of these removal spells dealt with single targets and didn't scale very well because of that in Commander. So I wanted to combat that by adding cards that can deal with a lot of targets at once. And it all starts off with Casualties of War, costing 6 mana, and it's a sorcery. So why do I like this card? Because at one time, it can deal with an artifact, it can deal with a creature, it can deal with an enchantment, it can deal with a land, and it can deal with a planeswalker. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've had all of these targets come up at once on the battlefield at one time. So this card, I really like it because it's basically a targeted board wipe that can just turn your board state from 0 to automatic destruction because all of a sudden you're overpowering the rest of the board. Now, another card that scales very well with Commander, and a card that I put on my best removal spells for under $2, so if you haven't, check that out. And this card is Soul Shatter, costing 3 mana. It's an instant, and it says each opponent sacrifices either the creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost. Now, so many times for 3 mana, I've destroyed a Blight Steel Colossus or an indestructible creature with the highest converted mana cost that just blows out an opponent. And the fact that you get one for each opponent, I think this is one of the best Edict effects. And the last card, I know it's not exactly targeted removal, but it's Scavenging Ooze, costing only 2 mana, and I understand it's not single targeted removal, but so many times decks are using the graveyards nowadays and just have small little graveyard synergies that Scavenging Ooze is just a great way to just target something in a graveyard and remove it. At worst, we're going to gain life whenever we exile a creature, and we get a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze, so it's going to get bigger, it's going to gain us life, so it has synergies with our commander, but so many decks nowadays just have small synergies with their graveyards, and this completely shuts them off. Even Instants and Sorceries deck use their graveyard to their advantage, and one of the best cards out there right now, for my opinion, is Underworld Breach. Just stopping cards like that in Commander nowadays is super important. Now that we got all the upgrades done, we have to do the most important thing, which is how much it all costs. And the final price, I got it under $40 with TCG Player, which is just a crazy number because I put in a $10 cards with Witch of the Moors, and even Veto was about $4 or $5, and it's creeping up and getting more expensive. So please pick up some of these cards because I think they're a little bit undervalued still at the price point they are. But the cards that I took out to make this all happen were some of the cards that just said whenever we gain life, we get to put a 1/1 counter on target creatures. I just thought these were a little bit weak, and also cards that we can pay X life and draw X cards, because most of these times these cost 3 mana and we still had to pay additional mana and lose life and to draw cards. I just thought the other card advantage engines that we added to this deck are just that much better. And as far as the cards that I would use to upgrade this deck is really the cards that take advantage of having all this life. And the cards that I mean by that are cards like Necropotence, being able to just be able to pay all of our life that we've gained to draw us extra cards, or Reanimate to use all this extra life to just put another creature on the battlefield. Or another great way to take advantage of this from the main set of Strixhaven is Beledros Witherbloom, being able to pay 10 life and just untap all of our lands while also getting us a bunch of creatures in the process. Just having cards that take advantage of having this extra resource we call life. Before I end off this video, the full list is in the tapped out link down below with all the cards that I added in the sideboard and all the cards that I cut from the deck list in the maybe board. And before I leave, guys, please just be good to your mothers. Mother's Day is coming up this Saturday. They're always looking out for us, so just do something nice. And that's it from me, guys. Patchwork Commander is out. Have a great weekend, everybody.